thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time this afternoon to participate with us during this webinar. Of course, as you can imagine, we feel this is a very important topic, and it's something that folks are talking about across the country. So it is important, and it's something that we will continue to be talking about. What is REL Appalachia? I should have described the fact that I am from REL Appalachia. I work specifically with a group of people who work on research for our area. Most of you probably have heard us. There are 10 different REL laboratories or regional education laboratories throughout the United States, and we serve West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. REL is administered by the U.S. Department of Education, specifically the Institute of Education Sciences. IES is probably what you've heard us refer to in the past. And more so than anything else, I think we want to stress the fact that we are here to partner and support you, to support the practitioners in the field, to support the leadership throughout our key states. So if there's ever anything along the way that you think, wow, I might need some research or I need some technical assistance, please do keep REL Appalachia in mind. The sorts of things that we produce, we are practitioner friendly. I did mention that earlier. We do these hands-on workshops, and many of you have probably attended some of our workshops where we go into your communities and we talk to state departments of education and county school systems and ask you what you need, what is it that we can help you with. Something I'd like to really stress is the fact that we are free, and not everyone knows that. How often does someone come to you and say, we want to help you, and we don't want a thing, we just want to help you, and it is at no cost. Some of the other things that we do, technical assistance and literature reviews. Example of focus areas, as you know, early warning systems, that is the topic of our webinar this afternoon. College and career readiness, effective data use, literacy and numeracy. We do quite a few technical assistance events on literacy and numeracy, and of course, classroom technology as well. And now moving on to my next slide. We really want to hear what you have to say. We are all about two-way communication, so please, if you're not already following us on Twitter, this is our Twitter handle, @REL_Appalachia. And then for this very particular series, we have developed a hashtag, and you'll see it's REL_EWS. And this is actually the hashtag that individuals across the nation are using to talk about early warning systems. And this leads directly to our next slide, which is this webinar is part of an overall series. It's a larger series that is being supported by IES, and RELs across the nation are doing very similar series, and overall it's IES and the REL program hosting this learning series, and we're looking at a variety of things, technical assistant projects and activities, different events, videos, tools, infographics, reports, specifically looking at what is working to help students, help dropout prevention, and also identifying those students earlier on. This will continue. So today is one of the first in the series, and then the next is in August, and we can provide you additional information related to the upcoming series. It's something that we are definitely trying to promote. Today's goals. We hope that participants will better understand the EWS models and how they can apply to your state and to your local systems. We really do encourage you to ask questions, or if you think of questions, go ahead and post them, and we will be opening up those Q&A sessions at the end of the webinar. We want you to gain an understanding of how EWS indicators and data can be applied in identifying and assisting the at-risk students. And of course, the final goal is becoming aware of the resources. What is out there? What are some of the best practices out there? What is it that you need for your particular community and your particular school? So the presenters for today, I already introduced myself. My name is Liza Cordero, and I do work for REL Appalachia. The next presenter that you will hear from, experts in the field, of course, Rolf Blank, and he is a senior fellow at NORC at the University of Chicago. We'll follow that up with Laura Hansen. She's the Director of Information Management and Decision Support in the Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools. Following Laura, we will hear from Daniel Leeds. He also works for REL Appalachia. He is a research analyst. And then we'll wrap up our presentation with Lance Selfa. He's the principal research scientist also at NORC at the University of Chicago. And sometimes people like to put faces with names. So these are all of the people on the other end of the line that will be speaking with you today and presenting all of this information. If you have questions along the way, please write them down. If you have questions afterwards, you see our faces, you know our names, so please feel free to follow up with us at any point in time. The final thing that I'm going to cover is today's agenda. We are providing the overview right now. From here, we'll go into the development of EWS from research to practice, followed by state models of EWS in the region, implementation of EWS, perspectives of local school district leaders. So this perhaps is going to be that time when all those little bumps in the road and all those things that we're not thinking about, a practitioner can tell you exactly what are some of those barriers and how to overcome those barriers. Of course, then we'll have examples of data visualization. And we're going to end with questions and discussions, and then we'll wrap up and have some feedback at the very close. We will have a survey for you to tell us a little bit about how effective you found this presentation and what we need to do a little bit differently. So with that said, I am now going to go ahead and pass over the microphone to Rolf. It's going to take me just 1 second to do that. And in the meanwhile, I think we're just finishing up our code.
Okay.
Okay, at this point.
Thanks, Liza. This is Rolf Blank. I'm happy to be able to be a part of this webinar today. I currently am working with REL Appalachia as a partner through NORC. It's a research center affiliated with the University of Chicago. I'm actually in the Bethesda office in Maryland. This is a high interest to me as a researcher, and my work has focused on research in education policy and education practice. For more than 20 years, I was a program director at the Council of Chief State School Officers, and before coming to NORC. And so while I was at CCSSO was when many of the states got involved with early warning systems through their work with the Title I, through their work with accountability systems, and developing indicators of educational progress. So my goal is to try to highlight some of the research that has contributed to this field of early warning systems and to shape what it is that we're doing at national, state, and local levels. I know the whole field has progressed significantly, and many people are trying to now decide what are the best approaches, what is the evidence about what works, and what are the indicators and methods we should be using to highlight and work with students at risk. So I want to focus first on the Everyone Graduates Center, the Johns Hopkins University, which really has been right at the center of a lot of the work on early warning systems. And you can see on your slide the website for their work. And I highlight this because about 10 years ago, when Balfanz and his colleagues at Johns Hopkins started focusing a lot on what do we know about why students are dropping out and where are they dropping out, and what are the relationship between state and local policies and school practices for dropouts. And so the work they did really brought a national and particularly state level attention to the condition of information about dropouts, about indicators that can help us figure out where we should put our efforts in focusing on students at risk. The work that Johns Hopkins has done says there's 3 roles for research, and I think it's important for us in the research field to keep this in mind about what do we need to be doing. One is about keeping close track of what is the graduation rate for each state and each school district. And particularly, there's a lot of misinformation about graduation rates because people look at different kinds of measures. Now, under federal policy, each state has a consistent method, a comparable method of computing graduation rate and therefore dropout rates. And so it's really important to keep track of that and for each district and school to know their rate. Second, we have to be able to identify the students, school districts, and states that need the most resources and attention. So that's the whole premise of an early warning system, is how do we bring attention to those needs. And then we have to be able to look at the interventions that work and the ones that help students get over those key transition points, such as entering into middle school, going from middle school to high school, and getting through high school to get to graduation. So we have to be able to focus on those key points. This is very difficult to read. I just wanted to highlight one page of the, if you go to the Everyone Graduates Center, you can see the annual reports that they do for each state. This is giving a state focus and some of the indicators that that they have put together for each state. So this is sort of a model for what are the kinds of things we should be looking at. So we have the adjusted graduation rate, the change from over time of the graduation rate. We have also on the right-hand side the challenges. So what the Everyone Graduates Center is saying, what are the targets that we need to get to every year in order to make a difference? They've also introduced the idea of what's something called the dropout factories. And I know when I worked at CCSSO and working with chief state school officers, this concept of a dropout factory got a lot of news and got a lot of attention because it highlighted how many schools and which schools were each state and each district that were what they call dropout factories, which is they had the highest, they accounted for the most of the dropouts. And so one of the indicators that we're calling attention to is the number of dropout factories in each state. And so this one is focusing on West Virginia, and it says there are 3 dropout factories in West Virginia. So the idea is West Virginia, you can focus in on that one in those schools and see what they're doing. So if you go to that report, you can see the kinds of indicators that are in each state, and many of you have already looked at this, so I won't dwell on it any further. Another important statistic is how is change over time, and I think this is so important. The reports we're getting now from this source is giving us a 10-year picture, and so the number of graduates and the rate of graduation has really gone up since 2002, and this trend line is important. I think it's important to not only highlight the problem, but to highlight the progress that we're making, and so that people are not in the mindset that everything's getting worse. And a lot of times in our mass media, we can get that idea. And so for our educators and our parents and our communities, we really want to call attention to how things are working. So this is the estimated number of students not graduating in 2012. So it's showing some progress. And this is the dropout factories I mentioned. And so in 2002, when this work started at the Evergreen Graduate Center, they were counting 2,000 of these dropout factories. About 2005 is when I know that this was brought to the attention of all of the states through the media, and the work sort of ramped up considerably. And I think it also helped us focus the work of states in using their federal money, because one of the aspects of No Child Left Behind was the school improvement grants that states got in order to focus on those schools that had the highest rate of low improvement, and so that people could then say, this is where we need to use the funds. And I think the relationship between the research and the school improvement grants was very important. So then we have a map of where are the states with the lowest graduation rates, and you can see this work here. Many of you are familiar with this kind of thing already. So the key indicators, and I think what's happened is that there's become a consensus around what are the key things to look at. What I've been noticing as I look across different states and school systems, how do we work with these indicators? And I think people are sort of taking these 4 indicators that we are pretty sure are going to predict problems, and we're also getting them more fine-tuned and possibly adding to them. But so, for example, they used the research in Philadelphia, found that 30% of dropouts could be identified in the 8th grade using just 3 indicators. So 8th grade math, English in 8th grade, and attendance. And so these are the things that a lot of people have focused on. I think Dan and Laura are going to talk a little bit further about these kind of core indicators. And then the question is, what else, and how do we use them? And so from the point of view of research, an ideal thing is that at a minimum, we have longitudinal data for individual students. So we have to be able to see where students are on these kind of core indicators and see if they're making progress as they, like for example in Philadelphia, as they move up toward 8th grade and as they move from 8th grade into high school. What are their predictors of dropouts, as we said? We want to be able to look at the threshold level of each predictor. So we want to, in a system, we want to be able to know what is the proportion of students in a school, in a grade, in a portion of our school district, that are meeting each of these indicators. And we also want to be able to say if we change the threshold, if we sort of make the problem a little less severe for our district, how many students would we then be addressing? So it might be that we have to look at the threshold to say what's the highest probability, what's the second highest probability, where should we focus our efforts, and how much resources do we have to work with. And we want to be able to get as close as we can to the highest percentage, but we also want to be able to have an effective program. One example from research is in Chicago, and the Chicago Consortium on School Research, which has been going for more than 10 years, but they have an example of where they work with Chicago schools on using early warning systems since 2002. And I think this is a nice graph of tracking their progress. And so in 2003, principals were made accountable for on-track performance. And so Chicago as a system said, we're going to put this in the hands of the principals, and then we have a 10-year progress chart from when that happened. Also highlighted on this is in 2008, the Consortium on School Research in Chicago released a report that gave further guidance to schools on how we might improve their on-track rates. So giving some highlights of work that has succeeded and work that is ongoing, and how people might use their data and use their interventions to make a difference. Also in 2009, the Chicago system started giving monthly reports to each high school. And so we're getting the idea of how much information, how should people use it, which people should be using it, and how do we get it, regular information that can be tracked over time in the hands of the right people. And so you can see that Chicago has made progress. And so in 2013, they're up to 82% of ninth grade rates of graduation. So I think this is important work. And in our slides, we have references to this work if you can't find it. This just highlights in Chicago the fact that they're focusing in on differences between by race, ethnicity, and by gender. So one of their priorities is to be able to see what progress we're making, for example, African American males. And they have made 28% improvement since 2005 to 2013. So it's important to be able to give our educators the nature of the overall change and also disaggregate it for particular groups. And so I think this is an important thing to highlight. So I just chose some of the slides. If you go to their work in Chicago, you'll have a lot more evidence of what they've been doing. I decided to give you a few examples from the different kinds of examples of early warning indicators and how they're used. And so one of the states that focused early on with early warning indicators from the state level is Indiana. And I pulled this from their website, which is an ongoing work that they've been doing. And they've been at it for more than 10 years. This one is bringing it down to the school level. And I just thought this was a nice way of saying, what do we give to teachers in schools, and how do we organize the data to make it really useful to them? And I thought this was a nice, concise report. So you get, for each student, their grades, you get their language and math proficiency levels, and you get some color coding about which students are having the most problems. You get the difference from the cut, which is the proficiency score for the state as defined for language, arts, and math. And then you get a progress report about from 1 year to the next. And so this is one way to do it. I just thought this is a good example that what people in Indiana have put together, and it's sort of a model that different people can use. One other kind of indicator that actually is a separate system in West Virginia, which is called their value-added model, that I think is worth considering under as a early warning indicator, which is the difference between growth and achievement. And this is from what's called their value-added model in West Virginia. I pulled this from their website. This is actually showing school averages for student growth. And most of you know that student growth is tracking longitudinally individual change, and they use the percentile growth statistic in West Virginia to show their student growth and achievement. And this shows the growth is on the horizontal column, and the achievement level of the school is on the vertical column, so you can see where they intersect. And in West Virginia, they also provide this for schools for each student. So you can see the student growth in a similar kind of chart. I just pulled this one up for the school, just as a way of highlighting the fact that this might be one that not everybody uses, but maybe should be considered as a possible measure for early warning indicators. Maybe people are familiar with this, but West Virginia has a nice way of explaining this to their community. This is an example of a page that everybody can get about understanding achievement and growth and how to read those charts. And so I think this is a good contribution. I'm just going to quickly highlight a couple of examples, and if we have time in the questions and you want to go back to some of these other models for early warning systems, we could. I just pulled out three from the literature. One is in across 5 states. It started in one school in Minnesota. It's called Building Assets Reducing Risk, and it's now being used in 45 schools in 6 states. And this one is was highlighted in an article in Ed Week that I saw, and the idea here is that it's sort of like the idea of an academy, and 30 students that are grouped together. They take their core classes in 9th grade and move through 9th grade together. They meet with teachers as a small group every week. They found that this model, Maine is one of the states, I think Minnesota, I think there's some in California and a couple of other states. But they found a lot of progress on reducing failure rates at 9th and succeeding through high school and increasing credits. I pulled out the Gwinnett County system because they have a really high-class data system. It's called E-Class, and it provides predictive analytics for each student, provided to each teacher centrally from the district level. So I think it's monthly, or we get from the longitudinal analysis of how our students are doing on different kinds of measures and what are the predictions of how well they're going to do. So the whole data system includes lots of other things that teachers can access voluntarily, including grade books, lessons, etc. So this, amongst data systems, I thought stood out. And another one that is a partnership between Broward County in Florida and a research organization called MDRC, who also works with Johns Hopkins. And they built around the idea of a 9th grade academy, but they sort of improved on it, and they call it a community of practice, where teachers are working together with administrators and counselors to figure out what is working best with 9th graders. So they work across schools and within the school district to build up a set of practices about how we are best working with 9th graders in Broward. So that one is supported in a nice article that was written by some of the participants listed here, and we can access those. So those are some quick examples that we could turn to further. Let's see, I've got to hand the ball to Daniel Lee, and I'm going to try to do that right now. And Dan Leeds is going to take over and talk about state-level models.
Thank you, Rolf. I'm Dan Leeds, and I work for REL Appalachia through ENA. And I'm going to be talking just a little bit about some of the different state-level early warning systems in the states covered by REL Appalachia. There are 4 states in the region: Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia, and each has their own distinct state-level tool. Kentucky's is the Persistence to Graduation tool. Tennessee has a Response to Instruction and Intervention, or RTI squared, early warning system. Virginia has the Virginia Early Warning System, and West Virginia has the National High School Center's Early Warning System. And just a couple of notes about some of the things that make these different systems unique and some of the things that they have in common. In general, one of the things that you want in an early warning system is that you want it to be usable. For that reason, a lot of the publicly available products tend to be run through Excel. It's something that a lot of districts can easily use without necessarily having to have a huge amount of technical expertise or having to have a distinct program. Typically, there is a set of algorithms in an Excel spreadsheet. People enter different characteristics of individual students, and as they fill these in, the column with either a risk factor total or a particular type of flag gets automatically filled in. Generally, the point of most of these early warning systems is geared towards preventing students from dropping out. So typically, we should think of the results as students who are most at risk for this. The most common inputs across all 4 states are attendance and behavior or discipline incidences. Every single state has those 2. The next most common are course failure, grade retention if someone gets held back a grade, and depending on the terminology used, either English language learner or limited English proficiency status. All of those were in 3 out of 4 states. But every single early warning system is going to have its own unique flavor. The 4 states in the Appalachia region use different numbers of input categories. Tennessee looks at the broadest range of different factors. West Virginia looks at the narrowest range. And in some cases, there are things that only particular states do. Kentucky is unique in that it's the only state to explicitly consider whether a student is homeless. One of the things that makes Tennessee's system unique is that it suggests tiered interventions. As you fill in the early warning system spreadsheet, it will flag students as being moderate risk, and it will flag some students as being high risk, so that it's not saying here's one type of intervention or policy that you should gear towards all of these students identically. It also considers 3 factors that none of the other states do: special education status, alternative education status, and involvement in the juvenile justice system. Virginia's system, one of the things that's really interesting about Virginia is that it has a lot of built-in features. For instance, you can sort students very easily by demographics and by particular time frames, looking at students by semester, for instance. It also has a large number of different flags. So there's a flag for attendance, one for course failure, one for GPA, and so on, that all contribute to one category that says, did this student have any type of risk indicator? And one of the things that makes West Virginia interesting is that they have actually contracted out their system. But again, as you can see, each state brings something different. Each state's early warning system has its own unique features. And that's not to say that any one state is necessarily better or worse in their early warning system, simply that there are a large number of ways that a state can pursue any of these. With that, I'm going to transfer the presentation over to Laura.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here with you today. I am Laura Hanson. I am the Director of Information Management and Decision Support for Metro Nashville Public Schools. I've been working in the area of data for a number of years now, and we have had an early warning system in our district for, gosh, probably about 8 years actively up and running. So we've had a lot of practice at this. Our district, just to kind of give you a sense of our size and a little bit about our demographics here, we are around the 40th largest district in the country. We have this year about 87,000 students. We usually grow a couple thousand students a year. We have about 70%, a little over 70% of our students are economically disadvantaged. We have a English language proficiency, limited English proficiency status of about 17, almost 18% of our students are limited English proficient, and students with disabilities about 13%. So we are definitely have some challenging populations. We have a large number of students who fall into at-risk categories. So we really needed a system to address that. When we started this, we were helped along in our journey. We received a Race to the Top grant, and that helped us build a data system, a data warehouse, and one of our intentions was to really look closely at early warning and try to really get ahead of the issue. I'm going to go ahead and flip to the next slide here. So in 2010, we were part of Dr. Balfanz research that Rolf alluded to earlier, and we were actually listed as one of those dropout factories some of our schools in our district were. So we took this very seriously. We really put ourselves out there and wanted to do something about it. Out of his report, you can see that he found that roughly 90% of our students that had no indicators succeeded in graduating on time, so that was very compelling. He also found that for students who had just one indicator, the chances of graduating on time were less than 40%. So that was really, and that's just with one indicator. For 2 or more, the graduation rate dropped to about 20%. And that we took about 10 years of longitudinal data and gave it to him, and he came up with this report for us, and it was really shocking to folks. So there were a lot of reasons, the research and analyzing our longitudinal data to determine what our cutoffs were really did lend itself to having folks realize the situation that we were in and the fact that we had probably had some control over identifying who these students were early and not just waiting as they slowly drop through the cracks. We decided, and this was done specifically for our high school students, the research was, we decided that we would apply these indicators also to our middle school students, and we have a subset of these, and we're still kind of working on looking down into the elementary grades. We certainly think that at high school, obviously, the data is very actionable. In middle school, it's very actionable as well. In elementary, it becomes a lot more predictive and kind of mushy. So we really wanted to focus on our immediate needs, which was high school first, and then looking down into setting those for the middle schools. So I thought to approach my section of this, you've had the previous speakers talk a lot about the indicators and the data systems, and I kind of wanted to give you a perspective from a district about when we went to implement this, some of our key factors, some of the things we did, some of the things we discovered, some lessons learned. And so I put a little slide here about some things to consider. And that, an early warning system, and you've heard the folks, it's all about the data, of course. And of course, a lot of people with longitudinal data systems at the state level came into play, and early warning systems kind of caught on from there, because you were able to pull a lot of data together in one place and then display it using analytics and visualization. So folks really started talking about data systems, and a lot of people started implementing data systems. And some folks think of an early warning system as simply a data system. And while that normally is the tool or an effective one, I always try to remind people that a data system is comprised of not just the technology, but also people and processes. And any of the parts in the implementation really need to bounce those off of each one of these things. So even when you're talking about the data, and we kind of, like, again, associated with the technology, there are processes and people that are associated with those data. And some of the things that you'll notice is that, let me go back there, especially around data quality, you've got to have reliable data in your system to be able to have a reliable early warning system to start with. That requires people to enter data regularly, and there you get the people and process part of things. So for the system to work, there are a lot of moving parts, and you need to pay attention to all of them. The one other thing to consider is that single data points never tell the whole story. Folks like to think, you know, what came out of Dr. Balfanz's work for us was attendance, discipline, and grades were the three areas that were most predictive of dropping out, and we call those our early warning flags. One of the dangers, however, is just looking at that single point and saying this kid will be a dropout, or thinking that it's the discipline is the thing that gave them the flag, that's the thing that is wrong, and only that. So the single point of data can be kind of a heads up, but if you're really looking at good early intervention and early warning, you need to look deeper. Let's see. Trying to flip, there we go. And this is just kind of a little example of that. I also think that this kind of situation happens when we're just looking at data at, you know, say summative data and at the end of the year. And this is one of the differences, I think, between state early warning systems sometimes and district grown ones. We find that if you have that youth graduation rate or, you know, summative assessment scores or some things that are, you know, a one time in the year, that you're really not looking at an early warning system when it comes to some of those students. You're actually looking at that, say, at the end of the year and seeing how you did, which is very much of an autopsy and not necessarily a heads up and actionable to keep students from dropping out. So we want longitudinal data, but we do think that maybe the perspective sometimes is longitudinal may mean daily. Another thing to consider is that data must be reliable and timely. This really gets to the data quality part of things. Our district spends a lot of money on data quality staff and focuses very heavily on the collection of data. Everything from behavior data, attendance data, and those two things are early warning indicators for us. They're also two of the areas that districts struggle with collecting accurate, consistent data so that you really can, you know, have that brought to the surface and be able to look at it. The other thing data must be is actionable. If we want to have, you know, early warning, which to me means early intervention, we need to be able to do something with that data right away. And if it's not actionable, our folks at the school level, our teachers, and we have early warning systems for all of our staff. Our flags are shown on all of our dashboards, and I'm going to show you a few of those in a minute and talk more about that. We also have our student support services. We have our schools are organized in clusters, So we have high schools with their feeder middle schools and elementaries formulated into 12 clusters in our district. And each one of those clusters has a student support services team, from psychologists and social workers to attendance folks. We've got different programming that happens by those folks. We have community schools and partnerships now that are also part of that, of the team that looks at these flags and identifies students who they can intervene with early. And so one of the things, I love this slide because it really does kind of make you think, you know, when would you like the data? This kind of speaks to the actionable part of things. You know, I would really like to know what students are in danger so that I can act early, like the picture on the left, versus waiting to see, you know, the percentage of students who dropped off the map last year. You know, that's the explosion has already happened, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with them the next year after they're already in trouble. So we want to try to keep ourselves on the left side of that picture. And it takes more than teachers to ensure that the success of all students. A lot of folks, you know, we hear, yep, give the teachers are the only ones that need this data. And, you know, we'll give them a dashboard and they will use it and off and running. And we learned early on that you can't just give them a dashboard and expect miracles. There were a lot of supports that we needed to put into place, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute, but it is something to remember. Also, don't forget other staff in the district that have contact with the students. Everybody can benefit from knowing that a student is at risk in whatever form. Our student support services and our community folks, again, are very key in this. And this is an example of our dashboard. So I'm going to spend a little time on this and talk about what's on it and why it's there. You know, as I said before, our flags are identified as our early warning system through the Balfanz study, our attendance, grades, and discipline. And you'll see that up at the top in the middle. And this is an actual dashboard from a high school that will remain nameless for now. And you can see that the at-risk flags, we've got the total number of students that fall into this bucket, and this is just in one school. So we have 264 students who have one flag, and if you remember those indicators, they have less than a 40% chance, or a little more than 40% of those students will probably drop out, 40% chance of dropping out. And when we get down into the 20% chance, we've got, or the 20% chance of graduating, basically, we have 46 of those students, or 48 of those students in this school. That's pretty sobering, and that's a lot of intervention that has to go on. And at that point of 3 flags, that's pretty serious. Our cluster support teams use dashboards very similar to this. We've organized theirs, however, in clusters. So they get to see their at-risk flags and a lot of these other pieces of data based on the cluster that they serve. So they're looking at multiple schools, and they'll look at the total numbers, but they'll also look at those numbers broken out by schools so that they can kind of manage their caseload. And so we do turn in these numbers turn into cases. These are students behind these numbers, and we take that very seriously. So some of the other things I wanted to mention as well, you know, while Dr. Balfanz identified those 3 indicators, as folks started to use these dashboards, and I should say if I click on any one of those numbers, I actually get the list of students with all of those factors and some other data that is useful for folks to really kind of get, again, the big picture of the student. So putting more data to that initial indicator really gives them something actionable, and they can be very informed about some of the other factors that might be going on with the student. But we also took feedback from schools to say, but you know what, and also other research. You know, you'll see on the second box on the left there, chronic absence. That we worked with attendance works and really got into the chronic absence, and we know that that is an indicator of dropping off the map. It isn't one of our formal at-risk indicators based on the Balfanz study, but it is now one of our operational early warning indicators. And so we start to look at students who have 10%, that they're missing 10% of their instruction time. And this is a great example of how you can start. You don't need to wait for a kid to have, say, greater than 5 out-of-school suspensions or have missed 10 consecutive days. We're looking at actual instruction time. So if you're early on in the year, this chronic absence gives you an idea of students who have already missed 10% of instruction at any point in the year, which can be very relevant. This has been some of the more actionable data that we've been able to provide our schools, and it's been working out very well. We've also got the ability of folks to see what types of behavior are most common in their schools. And, of course, that does relate to the students. If you've got students who are flagging with discipline, you can tell what types of violations are then contributing to suspensions with those students, which puts them at greater risk. One of the things our district has a lot of, and that last box down there on the lower left-hand corner, is a mobility rate. We have a very, very mobile population, and so you can see that with this particular school, their mobility rate as of about a month ago was 30%. We've got some schools that have up to 60, 70% mobility. And to know which students, and we know from research in the field that every movement puts a kid back 7 to 9 months worth of instruction. Moving to a new school is very hard on students and very detrimental to their learning. So if a student is in my school and has 2 or 3 moves already under his belt, he may be at risk, and he may not have attendance issues, he may not have discipline issues, but there may be some other things forming, and it may be grades, but this actually maybe provides a student that has 1 flag. You can see that that student may also be a very mobile student, which we're really saying that probably puts him at even greater risk. So he may be on the equivalency of a 2 or 3 flag student. Marking period failure is another one of those flags, so this gives folks a little more detail about trends in their school. And again, folks can click on any of these buttons and actually get a list of the students, which they find very helpful. And this is a high school, so we've got our ACT and plan, which is the earlier pretest for the ACT. So these are some of these indicators, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the key implementation factors. If you're wanting to do this, what are some of the other things you need to think about beyond just what are my measures going to be? I talked already about the data collection and integration. As you can tell, dashboards like I just showed you pull a lot of data together. So you really need to look at the data may not be all in the same place. So pulling data together in a way that is useful, we did it with a data warehouse, pulls data from a variety of sources and allows us to do really great analytics. And we have a research assessment and evaluation department that can also take that and look at, based on longitudinal data, what other indicators might be showing themselves as early warning or dropout indicators. Data quality, I already mentioned that, so I won't harp on it. I'm a big fan of focusing on data quality. Data visualization, we have a great team here, and we actually build our own reports. We do get feedback from the field. We have teachers telling us what visualization they need to best do their job. Visualization is important because you can give them lots of grids of data, and it can just overwhelm folks. So putting data in a usable form is really important, and we've got a team that tries to keep up on the latest strategies in data visualization. And visualization depends on the type of data you are trying to have folks use, as well as how they're going to use it. ease of use and support. These systems need to be accessible. As you saw, this dashboard is just a few clicks away from anybody, any one of our users at any time. Leaders as well as teachers, and like I said, support staff as well. We help people to use this data. We have focused on strategies called collaborative inquiry, where teams of folks get together and look at what is going on with these students at risk, and then having good structured conversation so that we don't get into blaming, we don't get into pulling ourselves away from the data and talking about what we think is happening, that folks are really grounded using data as the center of the conversation to have very targeted discussion about what to do with these students. And supports. We've, with our Race to the Top funding, we invested in data coaches that went to schools and really showed people what was available, the different data sets, and sat with them to talk about how this can be used. We can't assume that folks are just going to know how to use data, and even helping to define what it is they're actually looking at. So we have supports, and coaching is a big part of that. We've brought our also our instructional coaches on board so that while they're working with teachers in the classroom, they can also talk about what data they can use to look at what their students need. And I talked about the processes and procedures, and also setting expectations. This is where leadership comes into, it is very important. We invested a lot in these systems, so we really did need some champions at the executive level to set some expectations for how data will be used. And our early warning indicators are part of the things that we push. And stakeholder feedback. We get lots of requests from schools, and we seek it out. Folks that are working with teachers or teachers themselves, leaders, what would you like to see? How can data be visualized better? We bring that forward, and that's what we create in-house, and is the benefit of having an in-house system as well, because we can customize the outputs. And continuous improvement, being honest with yourself, and if it doesn't work the first time, being willing to accept that feedback and have discussions about how to get better. And finally, just some key supports. These are, ongoing after the implementation. The data integration is very important, and flexible reporting. Being able to change, again, and just based on what your users need. A structure and a framework for use. I talked a bit about the collaborative inquiry. We do coaching around how to use data and use it effectively, and it's been real popular. And processes for data collection and quality, I've mentioned that, and also the leadership and champion. And this doesn't even have to necessarily come from, say, the superintendent. This can come from a variety of sources, even teachers at the school level. So you get users involved and have them be your champions and talk to other people. And especially if teachers are finding it useful, district leaders and other folks will start pushing it with other schools, because it's more of that peer recommendation happening. And professional learning and coaching. I can't speak enough about this, actually. We talk a lot about the use of data, but really having some professional learning, embedding that in other types of professional development opportunities. If you are talking to teachers about instructional strategies in their schools, why not add in how do we use data to determine which students need these specialized instructional strategies? So again, using data for that early intervention. And being willing to actually make plans for action, saying I want to have an early warning system, and kind of just throwing it out there, at somebody's whim, or you have a small grant and you just kind of put it together, isn't going to stick. You really do need to have a good, solid plan for action where you've considered people, processes, as well as the technology, and then be willing to dedicate the staff to start carrying out those plans. So, speaking of data visualization, I am going to turn this over to Lance so he can talk to you more about that.
Hello, I'm Lance Selpa. I'm a principal research scientist here at NORC at the University of Chicago. I've worked with all sorts of data for a good 20, 25 years. And of course, in the field, there's much more discussion these days about actually taking those data out of big fat tables and turning them into images that actually take advantage of the human visual system's ability to process patterns. And as we've discussed throughout this webinar, practitioners have access to large quantities of data that can really help them to achieve their educational goals, such as the goal of this discussion here, making sure that all students are on track to graduate. But the volume of data that really makes it incumbent on us to figure out quick and effective ways of accessing, summarizing, and exploring those data. As Laura mentioned, those images of the dashboard that she showed kind of ride above thousands of data records, and actually figuring out ways to summarize those data that allow practitioners to figure out get quick assessments of them to figure out what to do next is really important. And I think that that's where the tools of data visualization come in. Because as I mentioned, the data visualization can leverage the human visual system's highly developed abilities at pattern recognition that will allow us to explore, examine, and communicate our data. As we've already seen, we've seen a number of different examples of that just in this presentation here. Think of, for example, the Rolf's slide of the dropout factories. I imagine that one could look at a list, a table that would list all those numbers one after the other, but to actually see on a time series a line graph showing the drop from over 2,000 dropout factories to 1,000, that really makes a visual impact and really sends the message home. So with that in mind, we would like to, we are going to be working on putting together another webinar later in this year, in the summer, where we're going to be discussing best practices of data visualization in illustration in a REL Appalachia sponsored webinar on data illustration and visualization for early warning systems. It will be scheduled for August. We don't have a date exactly, but it will be coming pretty shortly. So we'd like to illustrate how certain tools, such as the data dashboard that's shown here, can really support that high-level assessment of a particular classroom or school or district or state. And though Laura has gone through detail of this type of dashboard, I just want to call out a few things about how the visualization actually helps us to summarize and to see the data. First, the colors, for example, are color-coded, so your eye goes directly to, can tell you directly what those, if you know what those colors mean, they can tell you directly what is to be exhibited there. On the left side, you see the bar graphs and the about absences, and you can see one bar compared to the other shows that either the absences went up or they went down. So it's very easy way of sort of getting a overall sense of what the underlying phenomenon are showing us or telling us. So we'd like to illustrate tools such as the data dashboard that can help to support this. And we'd also like to show how analyzing data visually can actually tell a larger story, such as the one that's illustrated here with the West Virginia State Assessment and Growth data. For example, exploring these data graphically tell us that some of the largest schools in the state, the ones with the largest dots there, also showed some of the greatest improvement from the 2009 school year to the 2010 school year in terms of their growth rates, rates of growth in the median student growth percentile that runs along the bottom of the screen there. So those are just a couple of examples of how we'd like to use the tools of data visualization to understand our data to help our students. And so therefore, we invite everyone who's attending today's webinar and your colleagues to keep an eye out for details on our August webinar on data illustration and visualization for early warning systems. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer now.
Thanks so much, everyone. What we've been doing throughout the webinar is capturing questions from all of the participants as you've been submitting them. So what I'd like to do is, for those of you who have not had the opportunity to submit your questions yet, please feel free to do so while we're discussing the first couple that we have received. But the first question comes to us, and this was actually shared, a question that was shared during Dr. Blank's presentation. But the question was, is the West Virginia system the Bright Bites early warning module? For example, all the analytics without the spreadsheets plus targeted interventions. Could you kind of speak to that, Dr. Blank?
That is the model that West Virginia uses. And it focuses on the core indicators. The West Virginia also has the growth and achievement model, which is projected by the state for each school and each student. So it's a different data application than the Bright Lights tool. But the questioner is right that West Virginia does use that system for their early warning.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The next question is regarding the example that you posed from Indiana. And the question says, I see a lot of literacy and numeracy, but little reference to attendance or discipline. What is the predictive ability of these assessments, and how might we think about them in comparison to other course indicators?
Well, that was an illustration of that one indicator of literacy and math skills. They do have another kind of projection of attendance and behavior. I do track that. I was just trying to highlight the fact that there is a kind of spreadsheet color-coded approach that they're using. And so this, I'm not sure, I don't know how often this is used, but I thought it was a nice way of highlighting. Like if we drill down into Nashville metro system, they may have something very similar. I just thought this was a good way to show how we can capture a lot of information about literacy for our class and look at it pretty quickly.
Okay. The other was more of a statement and just not necessarily a question, but a clarification. And it came to us from someone who's participating from Gwinnett, and they had shared that their reporting system was listed as E-Class, and it actually is ABC reports, and they just wanted to clarify that for the group, and also that let us know that it's updated nightly. So that's just some additional information, and we appreciate our participants adding that information as they see things that we speak about. The next question is for you, Laura. It says, thank you, Laura, for sharing your work. I'm very interested in speaking with you further about your work. And she's interested in your email address, really focusing on the teacher supports and data coaching. So we will get that information out to all of the participants, because I would imagine there's interest in following up with all of our speakers at a later time for additional information. So the next one says, many indicators are indicative of deeper issues a student may experience. Are there better indicators of students' socio-emotional connectivity to school? And this really wasn't addressed to any particular speaker, so any of our speakers could feel free to answer.
Sure, I can take that one. This is Laura. At the district here, we've really wanted to do a better job with that. We played with, at one time, student surveys, and we're looking at doing another one. It was a challenging thing, just implementing the survey and getting back enough of the data that we needed. With all of the, the testing and assessments and all of that being an issue with a lot of folks taking up instructional time, it's really hard to get the student kind of, input and how they're feeling, and some information on other things they may be going through. So it still is one of the things we would like to try, getting some of that student specific, more in the soft area of things. And I will tell you, there's a lot of folks around the country trying to look at indicators of social emotional well-being. And while it's easy to, kind of get fluffy with it, again, it goes back to what is the data and how will I be able to collect that on a lot of students. And it really is the struggle. It is a conversation, though, with folks in this area. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you, but it's something that a lot of folks are pursuing. We have a big push around social emotional learning. And so there are some opportunities to look at, collecting data, but it's slow in developing, because every time we say, yes, we want to put that and do some analysis or make an early warning indicator out of it, we've got pushback with the whole data collection, and again, the people in the processes and getting them to realize it's such an important thing, and having them be willing to collect the data to start with. But I agree, very important factor that kind of gives us, again, another view of the whole child.
Thank you, Laura. One other question, and this kind of relates back to your comment that you just made, but the question comes in and says, to identify early warning indicators, how long did it take? How many people or researchers, and at what level were these individuals? Does anybody want to share about their timeline of how they started and proceeded with the development of their early warning indicators?
I think Laura said that their system has been going for 8 years, which sounds like a long time, but it probably has happened pretty fast in some respects also. I like the fact that Laura brought out the way they consider their early warning team, going all the way down to the school level, and that they also have a research and evaluation unit. Laura, do you think about it in terms of numbers, or how do you guys think?
Yeah, we do have a research assessment and evaluation department, and we do have a number of PhD statisticians, very, very data geeky type people that work for the district. We're very lucky to have them. But again, this started with Dr. Balfanz's work, and there's a lot of folks in the community who may be interested in crunching numbers. Again, we took 10 years worth of longitudinal data. It probably took Dr. Balfanz longer because he was doing it as part of a larger project and report with a lot of other districts. Once we kind of got the methodology down, our research assessment department can knock that stuff out fairly fast if they've got someone that's dedicated to crunching numbers with, statistical tools. So I don't know that it's really a matter of how long. It's if you've got the data, you can pull it all together, and then you've got someone to do it. It's a great thing for folks if you've got colleges in your community. Lots of folks, if you don't have early warning indicators, it may be a great project for a university to take on, where it wouldn't cost you anything. I'm sure they would love to do it, but then you have to just go through the data release and all of that, which actually takes longer, I think, most of the time than the statistics itself. So.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is, given that mobility is an issue, what have districts identified as approaches that can address the significant loss that students experience when they move?
I'm sorry, you want me to take that one too? I feel like I'm hogging all the answers here, but I think I'm...
Unless there's someone else, absolutely.
You know, some of the things we've done based on our findings in the area of mobility, we implemented continuity policy in our district. So, you know, if a student moves to another address, you know, we do have zoned schools. So if you live at a certain address, you're supposed to go to a certain school. We've got a continuity policy now. So if a student moves in the middle of the year, they are allowed to stay at that school. So that kept us from, you know, increasing the mobility based on our policies in the district. We've also worked with our Department of Children's Services. A lot of our movement is due to students in placement. Sometimes that placement can be temporary, and then they're returned to their families, but that interruption causes a lot of movement for the students. So we've really tried to work with our Department of Children's Services to see what we can do about ensuring placement so that the student can stay in the same school.
Anyone else have any information on that?
No, that sounds good.
Okay. The next question is a follow-up to that. In my state, we have very small school districts. This means students move in and out of districts in addition to moving in and out of schools. Are there models for how such districts can develop a useful early warning system?
This is Rolf. I would say that's a great example of where you might want to have a regional or a state model of early warning. Dan mentioned some of the different states, and the efforts have been to report out by district and school about the indicators, and I think that's an example of where the state level picture might be really helpful about what is our overall early warning, because you know, one of the things that the features of a longitudinal data system for a state is that you can track students across the state, and that's one of the main arguments for having it, of having a state system, is that you can track performance over years across states and include mobility. So I'm sure there are examples of states that are including patterns for these core indicators about grades and attendance in the same way. And it might be that that's something that we can look further at and try to highlight.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are all the questions that we have received thus far. So I would like to turn it back over to Liza for the closing and wrap-up of our event. Liza? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This is Rob. I was just wanting to see if we could get Laura to say take one more question. I was curious about, you mentioned collaborative inquiry and the teaming within schools, Laura. Can you say a little bit more about, does that collaborative inquiry carry over to teachers sort of sharing, like how do I teach algebra to these students that are really at risk? I mean, does it get that far in terms of teaming? You know?
Yeah, it can. There's a lot of, you know, it really depends on, you know, the leader and the priorities for their schools. But we've, the schools that we're doing this with right now and coaching, we use the basis, just so folks can kind of get an idea of what collaborative inquiry is if you want to know more. Laura Lipton and Bruce Wellman's book called Got Data, Now What? Right. Which basically tells you what to do once you have all this data. But yes, we have, we're working with schools that are really pushing teacher teaming and setting time aside for teachers to get together. They bring, you know, their data to the table and then have discussions. So it can be, in some cases, you know, looking at themes across the schools or grade levels or subject areas. And in other cases, it can be as targeted as discussing what to do about issues that specific students are having.
Great. Thanks so much. Sorry, Jennifer.
Oh, no, that's perfectly fine. Thank you. So, Liza, would you like to go ahead and do the wrap-up for the event and let everyone know how they can connect with us in the SFS?
Yes, absolutely. So at this point, you'll see the screen where it does show our website address. I did hear the question or see the question specifically about how soon and where would these slides be posted. Well, that is the website, www.relappalachia.org. Once you get to that website, you will see an events button, and once you click on that, you will be able to view all of these slides from this presentation. We also recorded today's event. We do have to go through a couple of checkpoints to make sure that the information is 508 compliant before we post it. But if it's not there within the next week, please just give us a ding. Earlier I had mentioned our Twitter account, REL_Appalachia. Please, if you don't follow us, go ahead and follow us. We're constantly posting our new reports, new information, and different events that we are holding. And then you'll see the email addresses for both Rolf and myself. Feel free to email us at any point in time. I will remind you as well that we do this series, this event was part of a larger EWS series, which will continue. We do have that information on our REL Appalachia website, so you will be able to click on a link and see the different events that are occurring, including the event that is occurring in August specifically. At that point, thank you so much. I would like to say thank you as well to all of our presenters for the work that they put into this event, and I think we are going to wrap this up 6 minutes early.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.